All right, so as the trench warfare along the Western Front in Belgium and France, as the World War I became a stalemate, and as we saw more and more battles where these casualty numbers soared into the thousands, the tens of thousands, the pressure for American intervention increased, and the initial reaction of the United States was that this shock over the bloodbath that was happening in Europe gave way to this gratitude, this sense of gratitude that there was this wide ocean, body of water, the Atlantic Ocean, that stood between America and the war in Europe. There was a magazine whose quote says, "Our isolated position and freedom from entangling alliances ensure that we are in no shape or form in danger of being drawn into the European quarrel." President Wilson repeatedly urged Americans to remain neutral in thought as well as in action. However, this was more easily said than done. What makes this so difficult for Americans to remain neutral in thought as well as in action? Well, first, more than a third of the nation's citizens were what we like to call hyphenated Americans. These are first or second generation immigrants. And these immigrants remained or had strong ties to their native country. Among the 13 million immigrants, German Americans were numbered around 8 million. And then the second largest were the Irish Americans that numbered around 4 million. And both of these harbored a deep-rooted animosity towards England. Germany because of the years of the naval arms race, and then the Irish because of the centuries that England had conquered and subjugated the Irish in their drive for colonization. And so these groups instinctively, sympathize with the Central Powers. However, on the other hand, old line Americans, largely of British origin, supported the Allied powers. And most of these, more importantly, most of our American leaders were pro-British from the outset of the war. Robert Lansing from the State Department, Walter Hines Page, ambassador to London, Colonel Edward House, this is Wilson's closest advisor, all saw in German militarism a potential danger to the United States. And so neutrality was definitely strained and definitely hard to accomplish for the Wilson administration and for the typical American. Going on to number C, blood money comes with a cost. So when war broke out in 1914, we actually saw at first a slump in American exports and the threat of depression. But by the spring of 1915, the Allies' demand for food and war supplies created an incredible boom and a bust. Oh, sorry, not a bust. A boom and a boost, I should say, for American businesses, American bankers, and American farmers. Looking at American bankers, for instance, to finance the purchase of American supplies, Great Britain and France needed loans, and by the time it was all said and done, American bankers and investors would eventually advance over $2 billion in loans to the Allies before the United States enters the war. You compare this to only $27 million to Germany. So yeah, remaining neutral in thought as well as in action, definitely going to become increasingly difficult as we lend more and more money to the Allies, because we want to see that money being repaid. And we feel like the best way to see or to ensure repayment of the loans will be if the Allies win the war. And so you will definitely see bankers putting pressure on the administration to support the British. The other thing that this increase in trade among the Allies and to a smaller extent to the Central Powers is going to be the freedom of the seas. So when we are beginning to engage in overseas trade with the Allies and once again to a lesser extent with Germany, we are going to cling to our official stance of neutrality. And this should sound familiar to you because when we're saying that we're neutral, but yet we still want people to respect our freedom of the seas and our right to engage in trade with any countries in Europe, regardless of if they're at war with each other, this should, kind of make us think back to the United States and their position during the Napoleonic Wars between Great Britain and France, in the years leading up to the War of 1812. So yeah, we're trying, to uphold this whole idea of the freedom of the seas, and on August 6th, actually right when war starts to break out, our Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, is going to call upon all the warring nations to respect the rights of neutral nations like the United States, to continue its commerce with them by shipping goods across the Atlantic. Central Powers accepted this. But it was actually the British that refused because they would lose some of their advantage in the sea power. And in fact, in November of 1914, the British declared the whole North Sea. The North Sea is the sea that divides Great Britain from Scandinavia, Norway, and such. They declared the whole North Sea a war zone. They laced the sea with mines in order that neutral ships to be to submit to searches. And in March 1915, the British announced that they would seize ships carrying goods to Germany. So America, even claiming neutrality, is going to have problems with its eventual partner in war, the British. And we protest the British, and we are not very happy with the British. But there's one thing that the British do with their blockade that's different than the Germans and their tactics. The British, they might harm American commerce, they might damage American trade, but this doesn't necessarily cost us American lives. So what do the Germans do that would cost us American lives? Well, the Germans respond to the British blockade by proclaiming a war zone around the British Isles. This means that enemy merchant ships in those waters would be attacked by submarines, and it may not always be possible to save crews and passengers. The chief advantage of this U-boat campaign, or this unrestricted submarine warfare campaign by the Germans, was in the surprise. And the German decision violated the long-established procedure of stopping an enemy vessel, providing for the safety of passengers and the crew before sinking it. And since the British sometimes flew neutral flags as a ruse, neutral ships in this war zone would also be in danger. And this means that the United States, their ships, would be placed in danger. And so, the United States, knowing that this could potentially cost them American lives and also damage their trade and partnership with the Allies, they pronounced a new German submarine policy and a violation of neutral rights. Wilson actually warned that the Germans would be held to strict accountability for any destruction of American lives and property. Then stuff starts to hit the fan. May 7th, 1915. A German submarine sank a huge ocean liner as it sailed through the Irish Sea. This was the ocean liner, the Lusitania. The Lusitania was coming from New York, on its way to Great Britain, and the German embassy had actually published warnings in American newspapers against travel to the war zone. However, Americans ignored the warning that was placed in the newspaper, and 128 Americans were killed among the 1,198 persons lost with the sinking of the Lusitania. The sinking of the Lusitania was the first step in this unrestricted submarine warfare that would eventually cause the United States to go to war. Americans are outraged at the Lusitania sinking. Americans demand the United States to take action then. It won't come for another 2 years, but you already start to see people, feeling that anti-German sentiment and encouraging the president to go to war, to take action. Theodore Roosevelt said that the sinking of the Lusitania was an act of piracy. Wilson, he urged patience. Remember, neutral in thought as well as in action. Wilson said that there is no such thing as a man being too proud to fight. Excuse me. I'm going to take that back. There is such a thing as a man being too proud to fight. There's no such a thing as a nation being so right that it does not need to convince others by force that it is right. You can imagine Theodore Roosevelt's response to this remark. Roosevelt cascaded Wilson's unmanly stance, called him a jackass, and threatened to skin him alive if he doesn't go to war over the Lusitania tragedy. Wilson knew that he kind of misspoke there, and he actually said, he confessed to a friend later that as he was speaking these words, he knew he should probably keep them in his mouth. He knew they were probably the wrong thing to say, and they didn't jive with the American mood to the Lusitania's response, but he said them anyway. And now his previous demand for strict accountability is going to force him to take a stronger response. And so then he comes out with some more responses to Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare by demanding that the Germans abandon unrestricted submarine warfare and pay reparations for the sinking of the Lusitania. The Germans countered by saying that the ship was armed. It was not. And that it secretly carried a cargo of rifles and ammunition. Well, that part was true. A second note that the Americans sent to the Germans had demands in stronger terms. Wilson asserted that that the United States was contending for nothing less than the sacred rights of humanity. So we definitely start to see the rise in tensions between the Germans and the Americans as a result of the sinking of the Lusitania. And American demands for their freedom of the seas to be respected and for their neutrality to be respected is starting to hold some water in the German government. In reality, in response to this uproar over the sinking of the Lusitania, the German government has secretly ordered U-boat captains to avoid sinking any more passenger vessels. Unfortunately, there's going to be two more incidents that are going to involve American lives. The first will be in September of 1915 with the British liner the Arabic. Two American lives are going to be lost there. The Germans are going to pay a cash penalty to the families of the deceased and offered a public assurance that liners will not be sunk by our submarines without warning and without safety of the lives of non-combatants. Unfortunately, in 1916, a U-boat torpedoed the French steamer, the Sussex. It looks like the word Sussex, but the Sussex, and two Americans are going to be injured. When President Wilson, as a result of this torpedoing of the Sussex, threatened to break off diplomatic relations with the Germans, this is like the step right before war. The Germans are going to renew his pledge that the U-boats would not torpedo merchant and passenger ships. This Sussex pledge, or this Sussex pledge, was far stronger than any earlier German promise, and that this pledge is actually going to, This pledge is actually going to be kept by the Germans for about a year. So the Germans are going to virtually abandon this unrestricted submarine warfare for about a year. And we will look at what encouraged the Germans to resume unrestricted submarine warfare, knowing that the last time they engaged in this campaign, it almost brought them to the brink of war with the United States. So when we look at in 1917, early 1917, when the Germans resume unrestricted warfare, we want to ask ourselves why. Why would the Germans, bring back this policy, knowing that it's going to, bring the United States into the war? In the next series of videos, we will look at the 1916 election, and then we will look at the acts of Germany that will bring the United States into war.